So the same question we've now started with, this will be our 6th week, asking the question because the answer really does matter for each and every one of us. Who didn't turn it? No, that's not the question. Who is Jesus? It's the question that I think needs to continue to shape us, even if it's a question that we answered a long time ago. John Burke, who's a pastor in Austin, Texas, commissioned with the Barna Group a large research of church people to say, do we understand what it means to follow Jesus? He wrote a book entitled called The Mud and the Masterpiece. But in it, some troubling results were found. And there's a quiz. You can go online and take it if you want. You can get the results emailed to you. You might not want to do it. I did it this week. 81% of people, Christians, that took this test. And it puts you on a spectrum. Are you like Jesus? Or are you like a Pharisee? And there's shades within that. You know, how well are you actually becoming more like Jesus? And there's sort of like the split right down the middle. You're kind of half of each. And then there's that spectrum into Pharisee. 81% of Christians who took the test found out that they were like the Pharisees and not like Jesus. 81%. In either their actions towards people or in their attitudes, how they think about people. So, while I don't want to be too bold, the reality is we can look in our congregation and say 81% of us either treat people who don't follow Jesus very hypocritically or we think some pretty bad thoughts about them. 81% of us. And so the question we continue to ask every single week, who is Jesus? Well, it really matters. Because even if we've said 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30, 50, 70 years ago, yes, I want to follow Jesus. There's this sort of creeping reality that realizes that too often we don't do it that well, or at least as not as well as we claim we do or would like to. So we've seen Jesus for 5 weeks now turn water into wine, a sign of the abundance of God's coming kingdom. It was the first sign he did in the Gospel of John. So we might then want to ask ourselves, are we abundantly making room for people to come into the kingdom of God? Or do we create stumbling blocks and say, you first got to become like this, and then God's grace is open to you, and Jesus just says, come, I've got enough. The second sign that Jesus did looked at the official's son. The concern that God has for all people. Remember, in Jesus' day, Israel was a conquered territory. They were slaves to the Roman government. And Jesus, a Roman official, someone who gets paid to enforce the king's will, comes to Jesus and says, my son is going to die. And Jesus says, I can heal him. Again, maybe perhaps calling those of us who say, yeah, we'd like to follow Jesus, are we putting barriers in the way? Well, a person's not a Christian. I can't help them yet. Once they follow Jesus, then I can. Not all of us struggle with this, but there are some of us who very deeply face that struggle and tension. The third sign, the paralytic. Jesus wants to restore both the health and the heart of those that cry out to him. Because he healed the paralytic and said, good, take up your mat, go home. But he found him later in the synagogue, and the approach that Jesus said to this man is, look, you need to stop sitting or something worse is going to happen to you. The man was content with, hey, as long as my body works. Now that my legs are paralyzed and I can run and I can get my six-pack abs back so the ladies like me, isn't that all God wanted? And Jesus says, no. The state of your heart matters more to me than that. The feeding of the crowd, the 5,000, the men and the women and the children that gathered to hear Jesus, where he reveals himself, look, I am the bread of life. If you come to me and you eat, you will never go hungry again. Last week, Jesus walked on the water. A sign. In their day, water was this fearful thing, this metaphor for hell. And Jesus says, look, even over the fearful things that cause your life to be a living hell, I have power and control and authority over, and I can save you if you'd only try to follow me. And this week we've got 2 signs left. We'll cover one this week, one next week. This week, Jesus is really starting to amp up his message. That remember, John is writing, I think, to try and answer that question for us, who is Jesus? And if you are going to read the Gospel of John, if you're going to sit down and say, look, I can read this in probably an hour or less. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read this. God, reveal yourself to me. John is writing with you in mind, so by the time you get to the end of this, you're going to be able to make an assessment about who it is Jesus is in your life, in our lives, in the world. The work that God is doing through him. That's why for our Lent series, when we finish these 7 signs, we're going to continue to dive into some of the teachings of Jesus, into the resurrection of Jesus, to say, who is this Jesus character, and does he matter, and how does he shape my life, and how is he calling me today to take a step or an act of faith? So this week, no biggie, he heals a blind man. Right? Can't modern medicine do that to some degree? Go in and get your cataracts removed or have LASIK eye surgery. You see it on the Broncos commercials all the time. Right? Are we just as good and gifted and crafty as Jesus was? Yeah, it took us a little bit longer, but we've got things figured out. We can do this ourselves. Except that in the dialogue of the healing of this man, we sort of get 2 distinguishing camps. That's why I think this book, Blood and the Masterpiece, is so fascinating. You're going to get 2 clearly defined communities. Remember, as John is trying to get us to answer this question, who is Jesus, you're going to have to start to make some sort of assessment on this. We're in John chapter 9, we're halfway through the book. John is saying, yeah, you're probably finding yourself in one of these 2 places. So we're going to discover first that there's this camp of the Pharisees. Those who want to limit the ways in which they think God can and should and is doing things. We begin to see some of their hearts and their attitudes revealed. We begin to see some of the ways in which they say, look, you're either with us or you're against us, and if you're against us, we're going to make it miserable for you. Then we also find, through the blind man, through, I think, his parents, the contextual clues that John gives us, through Jesus and his disciples, we're going to find that there's a rather alternative and rather radical way in which we can place ourselves in the story of this world. Because you see that the disciples and Jesus, they're just sort of walking down the road. And they find a man sitting on the side of the road. And the disciples' first question to Jesus is rather telling. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It was common cultural acceptance then that if you struggled with some sort of infirmity, if your leg was paralyzed or you were blind or something was wrong with you, you had some sort of birth defect, somebody in your family had sinned so greatly against God that this was the effect of it, quite frankly. Your parents were such terrible people in the eyes of God that you were born blind. That was their common rationale in thinking. Oh, those silly ancient Israelites, they don't know anything, do they? So, we probably do that as well, don't we? We watch someone continue to struggle or labor or hurt, and we say, look, if they can choose our hand and follow God, everything would be perfect in their life. The reason your life is so messed up is because you just made God angry. Repent, say you're sorry, choose to follow God, and all that stuff goes away. Well, it's not quite that simple. Instead, I think Jesus starts to point us to a more authentic answer. He says, look, no one sinned, but this man is in this predicament so that you can know the power of the hand of God that is at work in the world. We don't face hard circumstances in life because we've decided consciously to turn our back on God and walk in another direction. Sometimes life is like that. But there's also just the reality that sometimes this world is hard, not because we've turned our back on God, but because it's the world we live in, and God is giving us a story and a power within us to tell us and to tell those around us the power of the resurrection of Jesus. So Jesus heals the man. Look, I'm going to show you the power of God. So go wash in this pool, the pool of Siloam. I mean, Siloam, that's what was read to us. And interestingly enough, it's the pool at the entrance to the city that's right near the king's castle. If you were to go back even farther, even prior to the story of Jesus, the kings of Israel, right there where their castle sat was the pool of Siloam right next to it. As you came into the city, you beheld this pool where the fresh water of the city was stored, and you beheld the castle where the king lived, and he could look down on all of his subjects. And out of all the pools, and out of all the places, and all of the things that Jesus could have done to heal this man, right, we get stories in some of the other Gospels about Jesus healing blind people, and he spits on the ground and wipes the dirt in their eyes. Or, he tells them, hey, go to this pool and wash here. So Jesus could have done anything to heal this man, and yet he says, go to this pool, the one right by the castle, right where the king sets up his kingdom. This pool that means sent, and I want you to go, I want you to wash, I want you to come out. And he does it, and he's healed. Pretty miraculous story in and of itself, but again, we need to stop and say, what is John trying to tell us by including this miracle? Because he's going to conclude his gospel by saying, look, I could have written down every miracle and everything and every miraculous thing that Jesus did, and there wouldn't have been enough people in the world to contain it all. So out of the dozens and hundreds and thousands of great and miraculous and wonderful things that Jesus did, John chose 7. Write your life story, all of the things that you've done. Your graduation from school, or your marriage, or your kids, or your job promotion, or your favorite vacation, or all. Take the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of your life, the shaping significant moments, and you get 7 to choose from to tell people about. Well, the reality is you're going to leave out a lot of things if I only give you 7. But I bet the 7 that you choose will be the most impactful on the people that want to know you better. So John includes this one because there's something that we're supposed to be able to notice and tell about it within the life of Jesus, but also within ourselves. And so here's my proposal. This pool, this one that Jesus chose, is going to become symbolic of the new life that we have in him. Why? Because he is going to the pool by the king's castle. He's washing off his blindness, and he is emerging in a pool that means sent, to go and tell people what he's done. That when you choose to follow Jesus, you now follow a new king. You wash off whatever blindness or stubbornness or judgment or hatred that you have for somebody around you. And you follow a new king whose message to you is, go. Go tell everybody what I have done. For you, through you, and in you. And then there's this sort of follow-up, this conversation that we hinted at earlier. So do you see now? Do you get it? Do you understand the point of what I did for you? And the Pharisees asked that. So you see now? Were you really blind, or were you just trying to pull a fast one on us for the last 40 years? It's a lot of dedication to fake being blind for 40 years. But it really begins to get at the questions of power, of resource, of blessing, and ultimately of faith. This man was blind, but now he sees. His story, this one significant moment, shapes the rest of his life. He now can be reconciled to his family and to God. He can now experience life in the community in ways that he just couldn't before. And if you, sitting here, you pick those 7 moments, if you can't share your story of brokenness, of failure, of hurt, of past regret, or fear, or worry, or wonder, if you can't share that, we don't talk about that, we don't share that, we don't go there. It's in the past. Just leave it alone. Chances are, I think, looking at John chapter 9, you're probably more like a Pharisee and less like Jesus. Those moments of pain become the unmentionable time in your life. Jesus' word for you is that you're still blind. If you claim, look, I can see, I've got everything together, my life is on this trajectory and things are going great and there's nothing holding me back. I think Jesus' caution to you is, hold on a second. Because the second that you claim you have it all together and you've got everything working out correctly, you're still blind because you've just proven that you don't really need God. That's the biggest blindness that gets all of us. So who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? Who sinned? This man that he was born blind? It was the belief that somehow in the womb his sin was so egregious to God that he was born blind. I don't know what sin a fetus could make, but apparently the belief was it was bad enough that God decided, well, then I'll just make you blind. And yet Jesus' response is no. This is a sign to point to the power of God, the work of God. Jesus uses an interesting description here. He says, this is done so you can see the work of God. And the word that he chooses talks about the achievement of God. You think of God taking like a first place ribbon and putting it on the things that he is most proud of. Well, the Bible records for us the first several works of God. If we flip over to Genesis chapter 1, the very first story in the Bible, it says that God began creating. Let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that his work was good. His achievement sticker, boom, right there on the left. Continues. So God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate them. God called the vault sky. There was evening, there was morning. God said, let there be water under the sky. And it was so. And God saw that everything he had done up to that point, his work was good. Another sticker of achievement. Continue to work your way through the creation story. He gets to humanity and he says, look at that. That is very good. It's very good. You, in God's eyes, are very good. You are the crowning achievement out of all of the things that God has made. He is the most pleased with you. The jewel, the crowning achievement, the best of what God has to give the world finds itself in you. You are very good. So Jesus then meets this man born blind and says, you are about to see the work of God demonstrated in the world. This is the crowning achievement of God. A man who was blind can now see. Someone who was struggling. Someone who was fearful. Someone who was afraid. Someone who spent their life cowering in fear. Someone who was hurt by the things that society has said about them. Someone who has lost the image and the name and the character that I gave them with. I am going to do this so that you can see just how crazy God is about you. So wrapped up in this blind man who can now see, we are supposed to find ourselves and say, where is my identity? Because this man, once he was healed, could have had one of two responses, right? The one that John records for us. Who is the Son of Man? Let me see him so I can believe. Jesus says, I am he, and he falls down and worships. And there's this rendering of this man's heart to say, I get it now. I am very good in the eyes and the sight of God. This is very good. Thank you. But he could have just as easily gone the other route, couldn't he? Because we know people who we have prayed for, who we have asked God to do a mighty work through, and once they've received it, they've just hardened their hearts and turned to God the other way. This man could have just as easily said, great, I can see now I'm going to go get a job. I'm going to graduate at the top of my class. I'm going to make up for the last 40 years of my life that I've been missing out on. You know, I could hear of my friends and all the great parties that they had in college. I got to go catch up. And that's just as likely a response, isn't it? We've experienced those moments in our own lives. I finally got what I asked for. Man, I knew that extra hard work would pay off. No. That was the work of God, so that you can share your story and demonstrate to people that they are the crowning achievement of everything that God has made. So what does this with God life look like? If you're sitting here and you're saying, all right, I think I'm convinced. I might still have a little bit of skepticism, but I'm willing to try it. I'm willing to step out in faith. I'm willing to see what it is that this life with God has for me. What next? Well, first, I think there's this admission that needs to take place of our faults, our failures, and our brokenness. No one can stand up here and authentically say that they've got it all together. No one can stand up here and say, look, anything that might have happened to me in the past, it's done through. I'm perfect. I got it all taken care of. It's this recognition that God continues to use those moments to shape us. And that oftentimes what we think is having dealt with something is usually just the first step in faith towards something that's much bigger. All right, so I've stopped hating that person. I've completely dealt with this issue. Not necessarily. I need to work on forgiveness. You're going to take another step, all right? I've gotten it all done. I've forgiven this person. Well, not necessarily. Maybe there's a step 3 or a step 4 in your faith journey. Whatever it is your moment is, whatever your significant shaping spiritual blindness is, God's call is continue to see me. Continue to look for me. Continue to find the ways in which I want to call you to follow me better. And yet, in the midst of that, we are to inspire the lives of those around us with the working of God in our lives. Look, I don't have it all together. You want to evangelize somebody, you want to talk to somebody about faith, about what it means to live with God. Here's your 2-step process. Ask them about their story. Where's God working in your life? What's your spiritual story up to this point? And everybody will want to tell you, because everybody's favorite subject is themselves. And then when they finish, say, can I tell you mine? And let me just say first and foremost that I don't have it all together. Because the most powerful part of your story is not the times that you've had it all together. It's not your crowning achievement. It's not your magnificent GPA. It's not the ways in which you were stood up and publicly applauded. The most powerful part of your story is when you were broken or hurt or scared, and yet you trusted Jesus to heal and restore and work through those moments. If you ever feel like you're limited in your effectiveness for Jesus, if you're sitting here saying, yeah, I'd really like to do some big things for Jesus, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have the resources or the energy. I'm really limited. The question for you this morning is, have you allowed God to use those moments? Or do you hide them from others, ashamed and embarrassed? When you walk into the sanctuary with your family, we're family. When you walk in, do you say, I'm here. I'm hurt and I'm broken and I'm not entirely sure what today is going to look like. This last week was a rough one. But together, I want us to seek Jesus so that I can walk out of here more healed than when I came in. Or do you come in and you park your car or you walk up the block and you say, it's at church. Time to put the mask on. Those two somehow seemingly simple responses are going to shape your life for the future. One of them will lead to you sharing your faith, and people will walk away and say, man, that person, that man, that woman, if I believed in a God and Jesus were the Son of God, that's exactly what I think they would look like. And yet we also know from this study that far too many of us will have those experiences and try to share faith with somebody, and they will walk away and say, that's what faith in God is like. I want nothing to do with that. 81% of us, either in our actions or our attitudes, are more like the Pharisees than Jesus. Paul, the great apostle, the church planter, one of the 4 most popular people probably of the entire Christian faith, writes this, reflecting on his life. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weakness. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But what I refrain, so no one will think me more of a person that is warranted by what I do or say, because of them surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, just work harder. Try more, accomplish more things in your life, because when you are strong and can brag about it in front of everybody, then people will know. No. Jesus says, my grace is sufficient for you, my power made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in being weak. I delight in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. Because when I am weak, then I am strong. What makes Paul boast his strength? No, his weakness. Because he has come to realize it's only when I'm weak and God works through me that people take another step in faith towards God. The greatest thing that you can offer a world who wants to know if Jesus is true is your weakness. It's the moments of struggle, of fear, of doubt, of worry. To say, honestly, I can't tell you what's next. But I do trust that Jesus is leading me here. So let me be bold for a second as we wrap up. If you suck at following Jesus, if you're sitting here saying, I'm not doing anything, my assessment then is you're too strong. You have admitted to God, I don't really need you in my life. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to say all the right things. I'm going to say I'm a Christian. But you're also going to be able to look back and say, but God really isn't working through me. It's because you're too strong and God just doesn't need that. That's not the way his kingdom works. You were baptized, you washed off your old self, your old spiritually blind self, and stepped into a new king with a new way of doing things, and he wants to work through people who know that they're weak. The most effective way to share what you see Jesus doing around you. The way you can tell others about him. It's not about your awesome church. It's not about your dazzling success or your amazing pastor, though those are all true. The greatest thing that you can offer somebody around you is your brokenness. It's your fear, it's your failure, it's your, I don't have this all together, but I know a God who does. I don't know what's next, but I trust in a Jesus who says he's working everything for my good. I can't tell you how the end plays out, but I do know that Jesus will be there waiting for me. What holds us back sometimes is not our numbers. What holds us back isn't all of the fear. In fact, it's quite the opposite. That through a group about like us, God changed the entire course of human history because they were people willing and bold enough to stand up and say, I'm weak, I'm broken, I'm faulted, but there's Jesus, and isn't he amazing? May we be that type of person, that type of community this week.